Every birthday for 30 years, April 12th without exception. Every single year, a man named Earl Washington in Birmingham, Alabama, sat at his kitchen table at the same hour, picked up a pen, and wrote one sentence on a piece of paper. The sentence was always the same, written in the careful, deliberate handwriting of a man who had worked with his hands for 60 years and still held a pen the way you hold something you want to do right. I'm still here, and I'm still looking. He would fold the paper. He would seal it in an envelope. He would write a year on the outside in the upper right corner, because the envelope had no address to write. He would place it in a shoebox. He had 30 envelopes. They covered 30 years. On February 6th of this year, Earl Washington's granddaughter, Destiny, brought those 4 shoeboxes onto the Family Feud stage in Atlanta, Georgia, in front of an audience that had no idea what they were about to witness. And standing in a room backstage, having been brought there by producers who had worked in secret for 11 months to make this possible, was Earl Washington's son, Thomas, 64 years old, who had been separated from his father at the age of 34, and who had not known, until 11 months ago, whether Earl Washington was still alive. Steve Harvey held the first envelope in his hands. He read the sentence. He sat down on the floor of the stage and could not speak for 40 seconds. What happened next has been called, by every person who was in that room, the most important thing they ever witnessed in a television studio. Earl Washington was born in 1933 in Sunflower County, Mississippi, in the rural Delta, to a sharecropper family that had lived on land they did not own for 2 generations. He has described his childhood in the few interviews he has given with the factual directness of someone for whom the past is simply history, not grievance. Cornmeal for most meals. 4 miles to school and 4 miles back, on roads that became mud tracks in rain. 1 pair of shoes per year. A 2-room house for a family of 7. A father who died from something that was probably appendicitis and that was never formally diagnosed because the nearest hospital that would treat black patients was 40 miles away and they had no means to get there. Earl was 12 when this happened. He became the second oldest working person in his household at 12. He came to Birmingham at 22 and worked construction and eventually steady union work at a steel facility, and later as a railroad maintenance worker, and eventually, in the last 22 years of his working life, as a night security guard at a hospital in Birmingham. A job he held until he was 74 years old, when his knees finally declined to cooperate with 12-hour standing shifts. He married Louise in 1959. They had 3 children, Calvin, his oldest, who still lived in Birmingham, Thomas, the middle child, and Renee, the youngest. Louise died in 1998. For the past 26 years, Earl had lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in West Birmingham, maintained by his granddaughter Destiny and visited regularly by Calvin and Renee. Thomas was the one he had lost. The separation had happened in 1994, when Thomas was 34 years old. It had begun as an argument between Thomas and his mother Louise, a serious argument. The kind that leaves damage, that had escalated into a silence that lasted years, and into a distance that had eventually become geography. Thomas had moved from Birmingham to Detroit, then to Cincinnati, then to Denver, then to Los Angeles. He had built a life, an apartment, a job, a circle of people who knew him. But the question of his father had lived inside his life like a room he kept locked. He had tried twice to make contact. Once in 2001, he called the last phone number he had for the family home in Birmingham and reached a disconnected line. Once in 2009, he mailed a letter to the Birmingham address and received no response. What Thomas did not know was that the family had moved in 2003. The letter was never forwarded. Earl had never received it. Earl had never known Thomas had tried. For 30 years, Earl Washington had written his April 12th letter. Every birthday. He had never had an address for Thomas. He had no way to know where Thomas was. He kept the letters in the shoebox under his bed because writing them was the only way he had to hold on to the connection when the connection itself was out of reach. He told Destiny about the letters 4 years ago when she found them while helping him organize the apartment. She had picked up the first envelope and read the outside. She had not opened it. She had read the date, 1994. She had understood immediately, not just the words written on the paper, but the weight of the ritual they represented. A man sitting down every April 12th for 30 years to write the same sentence to someone he couldn't reach. Not to be dramatic. Not to perform longing. Because sitting down and writing it was the only thing he could do. So, he did it. Destiny was 28 years old when she found the letters. She was Earl's primary caregiver, the person who cooked for him twice a week, took him to his medical appointments, kept his medications organized, and sat at the kitchen table with him on Sunday mornings and talked about things that mattered and things that didn't, which is its own kind of care. She applied to Family Feud in January. She also hired a private search service in February, using $800 she had saved from 3 months of overtime work at her job as a hospital administrative coordinator. The search service found Thomas Washington in Los Angeles in 6 weeks. Destiny called Thomas. He answered. She told him who she was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Is my father alive?" She said yes. He asked, "Can he walk?" She said, "He uses a walker." Thomas said, "I need to come home." She said, "I know. But I need you to come somewhere first." Thomas arrived in Atlanta the evening before the taping and was kept in a separate hotel from the production team's primary location. Driven to the studio by a private car arranged by the producers, and installed in an observation room backstage with a chair and a live monitor feed to the main stage by 8:30 a.m. Earl Washington arrived with Destiny, his daughter Renee, his son Calvin, and his great-granddaughter Maya, who was 8 years old and who had been told by her grandmother that this was a very special TV day. Maya had packed her stuffed dog, a granola bar, and a small notepad. She did not know what she was going to write in the notepad. She had brought it because she had a feeling there might be something worth writing. Earl walked into the studio with his walker, in a navy blue suit that Destiny had pressed that morning, and when he saw the lights and the set and the audience, he said, "Lord have mercy, this is something." Maya, walking beside him, said, "Great-granddaddy. Are you nervous?" Earl said, "Baby girl, at 91 years old, I have officially run out of things to be nervous about." The game was wonderful, in the way that things can be wonderful when you do not yet know what is coming. Earl answered questions with the particular unhurried confidence of a man who has been alive long enough to understand that only certain things are worth rushing, and a game show question is not one of them. He scored on 2 of them and accepted the misses with equanimity. Steve bantered with him across the podium with genuine delight and without a trace of condescension, which Earl received with the precise dignity of a man who has earned the right to be treated well. When Steve asked how Earl stayed so sharp at 981, Earl said, "I got things left to do." Steve wrote this down on his cards. He meant it as a note, not a performance. The real story hadn't started yet. Going into the 4th round, Steve stepped to the center of the stage. He held up his hand. "We're going to pause the game for a moment," he said. Earl looked at him calmly. Steve said, "Mr. Washington, I've been told something about you that this room needs to hear. May I have your permission to share it?" Earl said, with the economy of someone who has long since stopped worrying about what he does or doesn't want people to know, "Permission granted, young man." The audience laughed. Steve almost smiled. Then he said, "Your granddaughter Destiny told us about a shoebox." Earl Washington's hand stilled on his walker. Destiny walked forward from the family row. She was carrying the shoebox, the first one, 1994-1999, worn at the corners and sealed with a rubber band along the lid. She set it on the podium in front of her great-grandfather. Earl looked at the box. He looked at Destiny. He said her name quietly, she said. "I found them, Granddaddy. I read what was written on the outside." "I know what they are." Earl was very still. He looked at the box. He did not speak. Steve reached over carefully and lifted the lid. Inside, sealed envelopes, 30 of them stacked and dated in the upper right corner of each one in Earl's handwriting. 1994, 1995, each year through 2024. 30 years. 30 sealed letters. 30 times the same private ritual completed in the same kitchen, at the same table, to the same unreachable address. Steve picked up the 1994 envelope. He looked at Earl. "May I?" Earl nodded once. Steve broke the seal. He unfolded the paper. He read, out loud to 300 people, "I'm still here, and I'm still looking." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey sat down on the stage floor. He did not do this for effect. He sat down the way a person sits when the ordinary structural supports of composure have been exceeded by what they have just encountered, and the body responds honestly before the mind can intervene. He sat on the floor of the Family Feud stage in his suit, with the open envelope in his hand, for 40 seconds. The audience watched him sit. Nobody made a sound, not a usual game show silence, something different. The kind of silence that a room arrives at when every person in it has simultaneously understood that what is happening in front of them is not ordinary, and does not require anything from them except to be present for it. Steve stood. He straightened his jacket. He picked up the envelope. He held it carefully, the way you hold something that has survived a long time and belongs to someone else. He turned to the back of the stage. He nodded. The curtain opened. Thomas Washington, 64 years old, walked out. Earl Washington saw his son. Earl Washington gripped his walker with both hands and stood as straight as he had ever stood in 91 years. He said one word, "Tommy." Thomas Washington crossed the stage in 7 steps. He knelt on both knees on the studio floor, in front of his father's walker, and took his father's hands in his. Earl looked down at his son's face. His own face was doing something that does not have a name in any language Claude has been given, something that lives in the specific space between grief and gratitude, and the particular, private relief of a thing you feared would never happen finally happening while you are still alive to receive it. He said, "I never stopped." Thomas said, "I know, Daddy, I know." He said it 3 times. He held his father's hands and said, "I know, I know, I know." 300 people were openly crying. Steve Harvey was at the far edge of the stage with his back to the cameras. His shoulders moved. Maya, 8 years old, watched all of this from the family row with her notepad on her knee and her stuffed dog on her other knee. She watched her great-great-grandfather. She watched Thomas. She watched Steve Harvey's back. Then she tugged Destiny's sleeve and said, clearly enough for the floor microphone to pick up, "Daddy tells me every night." "Does great-granddaddy know?" Destiny looked at her. "Know what, baby?" Maya said, "That he loves him." The room broke entirely at that. Steve Harvey walked back to the center. He did not look composed. He had stopped trying. He looked at Earl and Thomas. Thomas still on his knees, Earl still standing straight, and he said, "I have hosted this show for over 20 years. I have been in this building for a great many moments. I have seen things that restored my faith in the world. But I have never, not once, In 20 years, in the 45-year history of this program, I have never seen anything like this." He paused. He held the pause. "This is the most important thing I have ever been part of on television. I am saying that on the record, and I mean every word of it." He held up his hand. He pulled out his phone. A producer moved. Steve turned and shook his head once, calmly, with complete authority, and the producer stopped. He called his estate attorney. On speaker, he said, "Earl Washington, 91 years old. Birmingham, Alabama. I want a monthly care fund, medical, housing, and home support for the rest of his life. Fully covered. Managed by his family, and I want a separate account set up for his son Thomas Washington to establish full residency in Birmingham if he chooses to move. Open-ended, whatever it takes." Tonight, he put the phone away. He wasn't done. He turned to the opposing family, the Johnson family from Memphis, who had been standing across the stage in the particular stillness of people who understand that what they are witnessing requires nothing from them except their presence. The Johnson family captain, a man named Lawrence, was crying openly. "Steve," said Lawrence, "you okay?" Lawrence shook his head. "No, sir," he said. "I am not okay, and I am honored to not be okay in this room." Steve said, "Lawrence Johnson, you are a good man. And your family goes home with the full prize tonight, out of my personal account. Because this has never happened in the 45-year history of this show. And tonight, everyone wins." When the episode aired, 11 weeks later, the clip of Earl saying Tommy was viewed 355 million times in 3 weeks. It trended in 58 countries. The hashtag #ImStillHere was used 22 million times. Adoption agencies, estrangement therapists, family reunion organizations, and grief counselors all cited it as one of the most powerful single moments in the history of family reunion media on television. A documentary team requested access. The family said they needed time. 3 months after the taping, Thomas Washington moved from Los Angeles to Birmingham. He is in an apartment 2 blocks from his father's building. He visits every morning. They make coffee. They sit at the kitchen table. They talk. Or they don't. Earl has said that both are good. Thomas has said the same. A year after the episode, Destiny Washington launched a nonprofit called Still Here, which provides free name search legal assistance to help elderly individuals reconnect with estranged family members. In its first year of operation, the nonprofit facilitated 78 successful contacts. Steve Harvey contributed $250,000 to the founding fund. The mission statement on the nonprofit's website is Earl Washington's sentence, "With his permission, I'm still here, and I'm still looking." Below it, in smaller type, "So are we." Maya, now 9, visits Earl twice a week. She tells him her dreams. He tells her his stories. She has decided she wants to be a doctor. Earl Washington says, "Good. Be a doctor. I'll still be here when you graduate." Maya said, "You'll be 100. Earl looked at her with the particular expression of a 91-year-old man who has been writing the same sentence on April 12th for 30 years and has recently, finally, stopped, he said. "I got things left to do." He does not write the letter anymore. He does not need to. If this story about a 91-year-old man's 30 April 12th letters and the son who finally heard them moved you in a way that will stay with you, subscribe to this channel and hit the thumbs up button. Share this with someone who needs to know that the search is worth it. That being still here, still looking, still writing the same sentence to someone who cannot receive it yet, that is not foolishness. That is love in its most patient and determined and faithful form. Have you ever kept looking for someone long after most people would have given up? Tell us your story in the comments. And ring that notification bell, because more stories about the 30-year searches that end on a Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta and what waits at the end of them are coming every week. Do not miss a single one.